Hello, welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, joined by my trusty cohorts. Identify yourselves.
I am Chris Connolly with, again, the HarperCollins Library Marketing Team. Thanks for joining us all.
And rounding out the trio, I'm Lainey Mays.
And we're so glad you've joined us all today as we have a healthy and fun discussion with our very special author. But before we introduce her, Chris is going to have a few words of advice for a wonderful viewing experience.
Yes, tech overview. We're going to just give you a quick run through for those of you watching to have the best viewing experience for our esteemed, wonderful guest. Make sure you are using Google Chrome as your web browser. And if you are still having issues, be sure to clear your cache in Google Chrome, close your browser and restart it. I'll be posting a full step-by-step guide for all of you watching if you have any questions. But I think that should cover you and should be all set. So follow those instructions, we'll be good.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So thank you again for joining us. I don't know if I told you I'm Virginia Stanley. I think you know that. And now, without further ado, let us bring on the person you've been waiting for. Chris, will you do the honors? Ladies and gentlemen, international best-selling author Sophie Hannah, straight from Cambridge, England. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me on. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
We are so excited to have you here. Sophie, you have been such a great supporter of libraries. You've been to conferences, you've spoken with librarians, you really get it, and you are as supportive as libraries as librarians are supportive of you. So we thank you so much for taking the time, especially at this late hour, except it's good to know that you stay up late, so it's not past your bedtime yet.
Yes, this is early for me. The night is young.
Woohoo! We're gonna stay here all day and night. So, okay, a little introduction, and then we'll get to a lively round of questions from librarians. So please type in your questions in the chat room, and we will get to as many of them as we can.
Yes.
So, by introduction, Sophie Hannah, New York Times bestselling author of numerous psychological thrillers, which have been published in 51 countries and adapted for television, as well as the Monogram Murders, the first Hercule Poirot novel, authorized by the estate of Agatha Christie, and its sequels, Closed Casket and The Mystery of Three Quarters, of which USA Today praised Sophie Hannah does an egoless, silky job of reviving Agatha Christie's beloved Belgian detective. And the Washington Post proclaimed it to be classic Christie. So now, your new Hercule Poirot novel, The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. Love that. Will be published on September 15th, 2020, which happens to be the birth date of Agatha Christie. She would have been 130. Is that right, Sophie?
Oh, it's definitely her birthday. I don't know how old she would have been. I'm not good enough at maths to work it out, but I'm sure that sounds about right.
All right. Well, we have librarians listening, so I bet you by the end of this hour, they're going to let us know.
Yeah. I know that Poirot is 100 this year. Or, well, he's not really 100, but it's 100 years this year since he first appeared on the scene in The Mysterious Affair at Styles. So it's kind of Poirot's 100th birthday this year.
We should be wearing hats. So the Killings at Kingfisher Hill, a wonderful starred review from Publishers Weekly, says bestseller Hannah displays her superior ability to devise mind-blowing setups in her fourth authorized continuation of Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot series. Fans of classic fair play puzzle mysteries will clamor for more. Okay, we could go on with all the raves that have been coming in for the book, but I'm going to turn it over to you. And have you tell us, because we were saying before how difficult it is, or at least I find it that way, to talk about a mystery and give away too much. And you said, I could do that just fine. So over to you, Sophie.
Okay, so the Killings at Kingfisher Hill starts with Hercule Poirot and his sidekick. Now, in my books, some of you will know this already, but I will tell you anyway in case some of you don't know. In my Poirot novels, Poirot has a different sidekick from the one he has in Agatha Christie's novels. So in Agatha Christie's novels, if he has a sidekick, it's usually Captain Hastings, who I'm sure you all know very well. But I didn't want to have Hastings in my books because the books in which Hastings features, he's the narrator, which means that his voice is Agatha Christie's prose style, and I'm not Agatha Christie. So I created a new sidekick for Poirot, Inspector Edward Catchpool of Scotland Yard. And so he and Poirot, Catchpool and Poirot, are setting off from London on a luxurious passenger motor coach to a private estate called Kingfisher Hill in the English countryside. It's a very posh, exclusive country estate for wealthy people. And they're setting off there because Poirot has been summoned by a man called Richard Devonport, whose fiancée is imminently to be hanged for the murder of Richard's brother. And Richard is convinced that Helen, his fiancée, did not murder his brother Frank, and yet she's about to be hanged for it. So he's invited Poirot to come to the Kingfisher Hill estate. Poirot is on his way there by passenger coach, and Catchpool is going with him. And so the action starts as they're waiting to board the coach. And Catchpool notices that there is a woman there waiting with them to board the coach who seems absolutely terrified. And then they get on the coach. The woman still seems in a complete state. She sits down. 10 minutes into the journey, she springs up out of her seat and says, I cannot sit in that seat any longer. Somebody will have to swap seats with me. And Poirot sort of inquires what's going on. And it turns out, this woman tells him that several weeks earlier, a mysterious stranger, a man, approached her on the street and warned her that if she sat in a particular seat on a coach, she would be murdered. So he described to her, this stranger, described to her the journey she was going to take and said, the seat on the aisle in the 7th row on the right-hand side, if you sit in that seat, you will be murdered. And that was the seat she was sitting in. So Poirot obviously is quite willing to swap seats with her because he doesn't believe in any of this. He thinks it sounds very strange. And it raises questions like, well, if she's had this warning from a mysterious stranger, why did she sit in that very seat? Anyway, the rest of the journey passes without incident. And but then when Poirot arrives at Kingfisher Hill, there is fairly soon afterwards another murder. A body turns up, and Poirot has reason to believe that this new body that has appeared might well have something to do with the woman on the coach who was threatened that if she sat in that seat, she would be murdered. So yeah, so then there's several mysteries. There's the mystery of who is this new dead body at Kingfisher Hill? Who murdered Frank Devonport? Was it Helen or was it someone else? And how can the woman on the coach possibly be connected to the original murder at Kingfisher Hill, the murder of Frank Devonport? And there's actually more mysteries. There's a whole other mystery, which I won't go into. But basically, by the end of chapter 1, Catchpool is saying to Poirot, how can this be? We are on our way to investigate one mystery, and en route from London to Kingfisher Hill, we now have 2 other potential murder mysteries to solve. This is too much of a coincidence. And Poirot says, aha, but is it a coincidence? And I will not answer that question because I want you all to be kept in suspense until you read the book. But I can tell you one other thing, which is a bit of gossip. I do love to share the gossip behind my Poirot novels because anyone can read the blurb and see what the plot premise is. But for me, the gossip about the book is always what's exciting to talk about. And the gossip behind this book is that the entire idea, plot, characters, clues, solutions, twists, everything. It just appeared in my head as if by magic. And I had previously agreed with David Braun, who is my Poirot novels editor at HarperCollins UK. He and I had agreed that I was going to be writing a completely different Poirot story. And we both liked that idea. And I was about to start working on it. And one day, the whole of the story of the Killings at Kingfisher Hill just was in my head. And I didn't even have to make the decision. I was like, well, obviously, this is the one I'm writing. It just felt like this perfect, complete book had landed in my head as if by magic. Now, obviously, I'm not superstitious. If I was, I might be going, thanks, Agatha. But, you know, no, I'm very realistic. So I'm sure it was somehow my imagination that had been at work behind the scenes. But it really did feel like someone had just opened my brain and popped in this amazing idea.
So how did that conversation go with your UK editor? And you said, oh, guess what?
Well, as with many potentially difficult conversations, I just decided not to have the conversation at all. So every time he said, how's the writing going? I was like, it's going brilliantly. And I just didn't mention that what I was actually writing was a completely different book to the one we agreed. And then when I finally gave it in, do you know, the weird thing was I wasn't even worried, because I thought as soon as he reads this, he will just see why it had to be this book. And he loved it, so he wasn't cross at all. So yeah, it all worked out well. But yeah, I didn't sort of say, remember that thing we agreed, I'm not doing that anymore, because that's just guaranteed to worry people. So instead, I like to say, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. And then just make sure it is. Make sure they like the new idea as much as the old one.
Yeah. Wow. That's a real conviction. That's that you obviously felt that in your head and your heart, like this, I have to go this way.
Yeah, definitely. I just felt as though the story already existed.
Mm-hmm.
And that I just had to write it. I couldn't resist it. I couldn't resist that, especially the sort of chapter 1 with the woman on the coach. I could just see it all so clearly. And I just thought, I loved it so much. It just had to be done.
You know, the other thing that I really love about the book is there's a great humor. There's a great humor in this book. They're very funny with each other. I mean, I don't know. I found myself laughing, especially, you know, with the dialogue between Poirot and Catchpole. I just thought I don't know. They're just very funny.
They have quite a lot of banter with one another. And actually, that's something Agatha Christie did all the time. She was brilliant at sort of blending an approach which handled the mystery side with complete seriousness. So, you know, we're invited to take the mystery seriously and care about it. And it's all about the clues and the solving of the murder. But at the same time, many of her novels work really well as kind of just in a novelistic way, you know, with the sort of comedy and the wit and the insight. You know, there's lots of that in Agatha's work, lots of sort of funny moments which manage to be funny without turning the whole thing into a comic novel. So the crime part and the danger of evil and all of that is still really serious and taken seriously, but there's nice bits of humor and banter to sort of, you know, balance that out. Yeah.
Well, you've done, once again, you're the perfect person to carry on this, you know, the mantle, because it's you just do it so well. And it really is just such a perfect blend of a really very twisty story. What is going on here? But also you haven't, you know, you've carried it through that thread of banter and humor, which really, really is engaging on a whole different level. So anyway, okay, so we have time for questions. So we have asked some librarians. We have librarians that are writing in, and we have librarians who have already written in. And so let us start. Chris, Laney, do you want to start off with some questions that we have for Ms. Sophie Hannah?
Sure. Well, I have a question from Douglas Beatty with the Baltimore County Public Library, and I'm going to jump off his question as well. You asked what your favorite Agatha Christie novel is and why, and I'd be curious what your introduction to Agatha Christie, where that started, what your first book was.
Okay, so the first Agatha that I ever read was The Body in the Library. That was my introduction. I was 12 and I adored that book and became absolutely addicted and read everything Agatha had ever written. And I do actually think The Body in the Library is one of my favorites, partly for sentimental reasons, but also I do think it is a genuinely flawless novel. So some of my very favorite Agatha Christie novels are not flawless and they're favorites in spite of that, but I do think The Body in the Library is an absolutely perfect detective novel. I've read it about 4 times and I cannot fault it in any way. Not even a tiny detail is wrong. So that's one of my favorites. But I think my very favorite, well, there's 2 contenders. It's either Murder on the Orient Express, which I think is the cleverest solution to a mystery in all of crime fiction. And I love the structure of it. I love the sort of pedantic detail in the middle section where Poirot and his 2 helpers are in a train carriage, and one by one, the passengers on the train coach come in and they get asked the most pedantic, detailed, granular questions like, well, was the pipe cleaner at a 45-degree angle or a 27-degree angle? And then as each person leaves, they discuss what they've learned. And it's this sort of accumulation of evidence. And at the end of the second section, as a reader, you're going, well, hang on a minute. I've meticulously followed all this evidence and it appears nobody can have done it. And then when the solution is revealed, you're like, oh, of course, there was a possible solution. And I could have considered it, but I just didn't consider it. So it's just brilliant. So that's probably my favorite. But in terms of just as a novel, as much as a crime novel, I think an equal one, and one that has an equal claim to being my favorite is The Hollow. The Hollow is just a brilliant novel about human relationships and this family with all the sort of dynamics and machinations and secret resentments. And it's just so well done. And I think that is probably the Christie novel that as a literary novel, as well as a brilliant mystery, works best. It's just, the characters in that book are amazing. Even the very, very minor characters. Like there's a character who's an old lady in a hospital and I don't think we even meet her. We maybe hear about her once, but she's such a vivid character. And the son of the murder victim, who we only hear about once, he's such a vivid character. And it just feels really well balanced. Like all the elements are perfectly balanced in that novel. So those would be my top 2.
And speaking of Murder on the Orient Express, because of the movie that came out, I have a question from Becky Spratford, who fearless leader of RA for All. She said she would like to know what you think about why Christie type stories are so popular right now, and particularly they were, pre-COVID with movies and books, but that trend has only gained momentum after. So why do you think they endure?
I think people love to be really gripped and in suspense. I think people love that sort of the enjoyable frustration of being desperate to find out, knowing that you will find out. I mean, and I also think the mystery genre, I'm often asked, why is the mystery genre so popular and so sort of perennially popular? And one of the reasons I think is that of all the genres, the mystery genre is the one that is closest to our actual experience of real life. Now, that sounds weird because obviously we don't all stumble over murder victims every day. So it's not the murder aspect, but the mystery aspect, the desire to solve mysteries, is our main motivation for getting through every day. If you think about it, like you're always wondering, what did that person mean when they said that? Am I going to get that job that I just had an interview for? You're constantly wondering about outcomes in the future or other people's behavior and what it means. And in real life, you most often don't get to find out. Somebody behaved in an incredibly mysterious way. Why did they do that? Who knows? We never get to find out. So what the mystery genre does is it takes that constant feeling that we all have of desperately wanting and needing to know and never finding out, and it matches it with a guarantee that you will get a satisfying answer. And I think that alone would be enough to make the genre really popular. And then, you know, in addition to that, you've got a guarantee of an actual plot. Not all novels have an actual plot. And when I start reading one that doesn't, I really miss the plot. People are always trying to make me read worthy novels because, you know, they've had great reviews, and I'll start reading and 3 chapters in, there doesn't seem to be a plot. And I'm like, no, I require a dead body by now and a range of suspects, please. So yeah, I think it's that sort of guarantee of a good recognizable story. And the sense that, you know, somebody just and fair is in charge and will restore order. It's very comforting to know that Miss Marple or Poirot will sort everything out and make sure the bad guys get their comeuppance at the end.
That's funny. I love that you require a dead body, Sophie.
Well, in an ideal world, or not necessarily a dead body, but just a mystery, just like I want to know what I'm reading in order to find out. And I mean, that's not to say that I do read and love some novels that don't have a mystery, but I've also had the experience of reading highly praised novels where I get 4 chapters in and nothing discernible has really happened. And that's not my personal cup of tea. But that's probably just because I've grown up with Agatha Christie. You know, that was what I became addicted to as a young reader. And it's what I love most as a reader. So I just read 90% of what I read is in the crime genre.
Okay.
And then the other 10% is probably self-help books, which I also love.
We have a lot of librarians here from all over the country, from Pennsylvania and from Ohio. And Gabriella Griselda says, thanks for keeping Poirot alive. I love your catch pool. I am a fan from Indonesia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'll read the next question. And this is from Wendy Bartlett from Cuyahoga Library in Ohio. And going back to what you were just saying, Sophie, about, you know, you grew up reading Agatha Christie. What does it feel like to get in the ring with Agatha Christie? What does Harold Bloom call it? The anxiety of influence. It takes a lot of courage to continue a series by someone who basically invented the genre. Do you feel any anxiety of influence at all?
I'm not sure what the question means by anxiety of influence in terms of just general anxiety because Agatha Christie is so legendary. I actually think that makes me less anxious because I've never approached this task thinking I need to try and compete with Agatha Christie because she is a towering genius. She's still by far the most popular and best-selling crime writer who's ever lived. And I'm not convinced anyone could ever really reach her exalted heights. And I certainly wouldn't presume to think that I could. So I am very happy thinking that I am sort of working to draw attention to how brilliant she was. Like that's, for me, it's like I'm serving a much greater thing than myself. And that actually is brilliant because I get to make up these stories and I love doing it, but I feel that it's important work because it's continuing the creation of the greatest crime writer who's ever lived. And so in a way, I feel the opposite of anxiety. I feel a kind of peacefulness of like, well, I'm not trying to be Agatha Christie. And if I did, I would fail because I'm just me. What I am trying to do is write really satisfying Poirot novels so that Agatha Christie's great creation, Poirot, can live on. And so that all those millions of Poirot and Agatha fans out there can have the excitement of thinking more Poirot stories. And like, I imagine how I, as an Agatha Christie super fan, would feel if it was announced that somebody else was writing new Miss Marple novels and I could think, oh, there's going to be more Miss Marples just when you thought there weren't going to be. That would be really exciting for me. So I do feel a massive responsibility, and I feel really honoured to be assigned this role of continuing Poirot. But for me, it's never taken the form of anxiety. It's always taken the form of excitement and wanting to rise to the challenge.
That's so lovely. That is just lovely. And Wendy Bartlett is watching, and she says, very interesting, and thank you. That's a lovely response. All right, Chris Laney.
Okay, so my question is from Beth Mills, another librarian friend. And you spoke to this to a degree, but she asked if you find it difficult or challenging in any unique ways to maintain the style of series while coming up with fresh ideas with the to peak 21st century interest. Has your approach changed in that regard, or?
So what I've never tried to copy the actual writing style of Agatha Christie. So I'm not trying to write books that could be mistaken for books written by Agatha. Definitely not. I don't believe that one writer can or should copy the actual prose style of another. So what I've tried to do is write books which share the storytelling priorities of all of Agatha Christie's sort of golden age Poirot novels. So what I'm aiming to do is write Poirot novels that would appeal to all the same people who love Agatha's Poirot novels. But I know that I'm writing those novels in a different voice because obviously I'm me and not her. And that's one advantage of Inspector Catchpool, because he is the narrator of all of my Poirot novels. He's a new character. So if people read my Poirot novels and think, okay, well, this is Poirot, but the tone, the voice is slightly different, well, there's a sensible reason for that. It's a new character talking about Poirot. So that worked really well for me because I'm a new person writing about Poirot. Catchpool, created by me, is a new person talking about Poirot, but Poirot is still Agatha Christie's Poirot and the same in every detail. In terms of 21st century, at the very first meeting I had with the Christie family, Matthew Pritchard, Agatha's grandson, who at the time was chairman of Agatha Christie Limited, Matthew said to me, if we ask you to write this novel, will you want to update Poirot and bring him into the 21st century? And I had never thought about this because I actually went to that meeting having no idea they were going to consider asking me to write a book. So I was not prepared. But luckily I have this superpower, which is the ability to be massively opinionated at very short notice. So I can have given something no thought whatsoever. If you mention it to me 3 seconds later, I can have a very strong opinion. And when Matthew said, did I want to bring Poirot into the 21st century? I just thought, absolutely not. That would be horrendous. Imagine Poirot Googling suspects. That's what I do. If I get curious about mysterious people in my life, I Google them. I undertake some real life detective work. I get online and I look at their Facebook and their Instagram, but I don't want Poirot doing that. He needs to be, in the 20s and 30s, doing good old fashioned thinking and legwork rather than, going online. So I just thought, no, I don't want to do that. So I very much wanted to write about Poirot as he was in what I regard as his classic phase, which is from sort of mid-20s to early 40s. Not his 20s and 40s, but 1920s to 1940s.
Yeah. And I know you touched on this, but I want to shout out Kelly Moore, our librarian friend from Texas. She had asked, how did you get chosen by the estate of Agatha Christie to continue the series? So I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Well, it was a huge, huge coincidence that it ended up being me writing these books. Basically, my literary agent was in a meeting with HarperCollins UK about a completely different book and author, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with Agatha. But he happened to be sitting next to a shelf of Agatha Christie books. And as he was idly looking at these spines on the shelf, he remembered that I was a big fan of Agatha Christie. So he just interrupted this meeting, which was about something else, and said, hey, you guys publish Agatha Christie. She's been dead for a while. They were like, yes, we know. And he said, well, why don't you consider asking a writer to write new Poirot novels or new Miss Marple, and I have the perfect author for you. My client, Sophie Hannah, is a huge Agatha fan. And David Braun, who is now my editor at HarperCollins, he said, no, 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 the family would not like anything like that to happen. And my agent actually rang me that night and said, I suggested this, and HarperCollins said no. And I was quite annoyed with him. I was like, look, I was fine not writing Poirot novels. It had never even occurred to me. And out of nowhere, you've just created an opportunity for me to be rejected for something that I would never have thought to apply for in the first place. So cheers for that. Anyway, then the next day he rang up again and said, the Christie family want to meet you. So off we go to this meeting. And I'm thinking, why do they want to meet me? I thought it was a no. And it turned out that David Braun, the HarperCollins editor, the very next day after he'd had this meeting with my agent, had had a meeting with Matthew Pritchard and the Christie family. And Matthew had said at that meeting, this is going to surprise you after everything we've been saying for all these years, but we, the family, are now thinking that we might actually want a new book. At which point David said, well, I met this agent yesterday who thinks he might have the perfect author. And it all came from that. And, you know, if my agent hadn't made that suggestion, there probably, in fact, there almost definitely would have still been a new Poirot novel, at least one. But it's very unlikely that I would have written it because it was just my agent saying it that enabled David to know I existed in the first place. Weird story.
That's a wild story.
Yeah, just total coincidence of timing.
You have a lot of coincidence.
Or destiny and fate, depending on how you want to look at it.
Kind of like this book.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you think about it. So we have questions coming in all over, and I don't want to overlap the questions. Let's see. What, Chris Laney, what are the questions do you have while I look at Facebook?
Let's see. Paulette Brooks wants to know if you have come across an iteration of Hercule Poirot that's influenced your writing of this series. So whether it's a iteration in a movie or a television series, or do you envision anyone? Does anyone come to mind when you're writing?
If she means sort of a physical manifestation of Poirot, but I'm not sure she does mean that. I mean, in terms of what's influenced my Poirot writing, I think it's kind of everything. You know, I've read the books many times. When I heard I was going to be writing a Poirot novel, I immediately reread all of Agatha's Poirot novels. And I saw that the Poirot in the novels is actually slightly different from all the on-screen versions. So you've got the novels Poirot, and actually he's different from one novel to, he's not fundamentally different between the novels, but there are small differences. Even in Agatha's portrayals of him, he can be a bit shape-shifty sometimes. Like there are some novels where he says, I would never do da 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 da, and then in another novel he does that thing. So that was an influence. I'd also watched at that point David Suchet, all of those adaptations. I'd also seen Peter Ustinov and Albert Finney. So I think probably all of it came together, but I think the main influence is the Poirot from the novels. I tried to focus more on that than on any on-screen portrayal of him, because that was the bit that came from Agatha.
I have a question from Lillian Dabney, a good friend of ours. And so part of her questions have been answered already, but she wants to know, do you have time for your own writing and other than this, and what are you reading?
Yeah, so what I do, because I publish, so far I've published a Poirot novel every 2 years since I started. So in the years in between, I publish what I now call a non-Poirot novel, and that's either one of my Culver Valley series. Some of you will know that I write this other series featuring Detective Constable Simon Waterhouse and Sergeant Charlie Zayler. So I'll either publish one of those, or in recent years, I've published several standalones, the most recent of which is called Perfect Little Children in the US, and in the UK, it's called Haven't They Grown? So yeah, I do have time to write non-Poirot novels as well. And I really love switching from one to the other. I love the fact that I now do both. and that they're so sort of tonally different from one another. And it makes me feel kind of more refreshed each time I return to the other mode. And it also makes me think, you know, like before I was asked to write a Poirot novel, I just assumed that what I wrote was contemporary psychological thrillers. And it didn't really occur to me that I could write some other kind of crime novel. But now that I've written, you know, I've written a supernatural mystery called The Orphan Choir. I've written Poirots, I've written psychological thrillers, both series and standalone. So now I think I have much more powerful an awareness that actually I can choose to write any kind of novel that I want. And that's very liberating. What's weird, though, is that as I have an idea, I just know whether it's Poirot or Simon and Charlie or a standalone. And when I think about assigning a Poirot story to Simon and Charlie or vice versa, I'm like, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that.
Maybe it's some intervention, somebody telling you some stuff. So Adrienne Cruz, librarian friend, she asks us a really good question. I love this question. It says, if you were at a bookstore and someone asked you for a recommendation on a Sophie Hannah novel, not knowing that you were the author, which title would come to mind first and how would you describe it?
Okay, I will answer that question, but I'm aware that I didn't answer part of the last question, which is what do I read? So let me do that one first. So I reread Agatha all the time. I also, though, love other writers, and my favourite living writer is Tana French, who I know is hugely well known in America. I think her books are amazing, so I read her books as soon as I can, as soon as they come out. And who else do I like? I'm a big fan of Ruth Rendell, also the books she wrote under the name Barbara Vine. I would say Ruth Rendell, Agatha Christie, Tana French, and Daphne du Maurier, who is sadly not with us anymore, but she's another one of my top faves. And I have a favourite poet as well, an American poet called Edna St. Vincent Millay, who I'm sure you all know. When I was doing my English and American literature degree, and I was supposed to be reading and studying Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, neither of whom wrote sonnets about boyfriends that had screwed them over, whereas Edna was writing about all her dodgy boyfriends and broken hearts. And I discovered her collected poems in the university library. And I thought, well, this is more fun than T.S. Eliot. So she became a big favourite of mine. Okay, if I was recommending one of my books, obviously I could go, oh, it's so hard, but I'm not going to skip that stage. I would recommend Perfect Little Children, which in England, I'll say it again, is called Haven't They Grown? There is something about that book that just, from the minute I had the idea, the premise is basically that the main character, Beth, sees her friend who she hasn't seen for 12 years. The friend is with her children, and 12 years ago, these children were 5 and 3 years old. And when she sees them now in the present day, they still appear to be 5 and 3 years old. They are wearing the same clothes they were wearing 12 years ago. They don't look a day older. Now, obviously, Beth knows this is impossible because, as we know, children do grow older and taller and more teenagerish. But these two children appear not to have. And she hears her friend calling them by their names, Thomas and Emily. So she knows it's them. Why haven't they grown? Now, as soon as I had the idea for that premise, I just had goosebumps. And I was like, that is the perfect idea because it's such an intriguing mystery. And I couldn't think of why that would ever happen. But instead of just thinking, well, in that case, I can't write the book, I never give up. I thought there must be a resolution that would make this work. And then I came up with this perfect resolution. So that book has a kind of atmosphere of just perfect idea and resolution combination about it. So that's the one I'd recommend. What was the second part of the question?
I think those are two. What would come first to mind and how would you describe it?
How would I do? Yeah, so that's how I would describe it.
Perfect.
What's harder is if someone were to ask me which of my Poirot novels I'd recommend, because I have different reasons for loving them all. So the Killings at Kingfisher Hill, a bit like Perfect Little Children, has that kind of like, this must be a magic book because it just arrived and it seemed perfect. So I love it for that reason. But I know that The Mystery of Three Quarters, my third Poirot novel, so many people have said to me that that's the best one, that I kind of think maybe it's the best one. And also it features a very cute dog. A bit like, so that was kind of in a way influenced by Dumb Witness, which is the Agatha Christie Poirot novel where Bob, the dog, is a prominent character in it. And Closed Casket I love because that idea started with an idea for a motive for murder that I just thought, that is so clever. Just that motive, it was so clever and so simple. And my immediate worry was someone must have done this before. And so I did some research and nobody had. So I love that book because I think it's got the cleverest motive in it. And I love the Monogram Murders because it's the first one. So I would find it much harder to choose a favourite of my Poirot novels.
We have a question from Maureen Roberts in Baltimore. Do you have any theory on Agatha's 11-day disappearance in 1926?
I mean, yes, I have a theory, but I'm not sure my theory is worth anything because I don't really know. I'm much more interested in her writing than I am in the 11 days, but that's partly because to me it's not that mysterious. She'd been married to Archie Christie for a while. He was behaving not particularly well, and just before she disappeared for the 11 days, he was really being a bit of a rotter and saying things like, I want a divorce and I want to go off with our friend Nancy and things like that. So to me, it's not that mysterious. I too might have got in my car and headed for a nice hotel to get away from Archie being annoying. So, I mean, I've always just assumed that was it. I think, you know, her marriage was breaking down. He was upsetting her and she just wanted to get away. That is my theory. But, you know, I haven't really spent a lot of time trying to come up with a better theory than that. So maybe my theory is a bit obvious, but I'm sticking with it.
Well, that gut instinct has served you well so far. Jennifer Winberry has an interesting question. Hercule Poirot has many, shall we say, peculiarities. Was it difficult to write such a well-known character and get all the details just right? Has anyone ever called you on something and said, like, Poirot would never say or do that?
So I didn't feel it was difficult because I'd read all the books in which he featured so many times that to me he was just like a real person that existed in the world. So even though he existed in the form of stories, I felt as though I was just writing about someone I knew really well. And so it felt as natural as writing about, like, if I were to write a story about my mum or my husband. You know, I just know Poirot from reading all of Agatha's books so many times. Yes, people have occasionally emailed me and said, in this book, you have Poirot do this and he would never do that. But whenever it's happened, it's always been incorrect. So somebody wrote to me and said, in the Monogram Murders, you have Poirot going for a walk outside. Poirot hated going outdoors and always preferred to be inside. And I wrote back and said, you know, thank you so much for your email, but, you know, there are examples among Agatha's Poirot novels where he does venture outside. You know, it's just like Poirot often says, I don't need to go anywhere. I can solve every mystery by sitting in a chair using my little grey cells. And yet, in many a novel, he disappears off to another country in order to get some information. So, yeah, people have said things like that, but it's always so far been about something that, you know, they've said Poirot would never do that, and it's always something he has done in Agatha Christie's Poirot novels. And so my rule of thumb is if he's done it in an Agatha novel, then I can have him do it. The one thing I've done that I think one person criticised, and I thought they had a fair point, in the Monogram Murders, he goes to Pleasance Coffee House, this particular coffee house that he likes to go to. And in one scene, he is drinking coffee at a time of day when he probably wouldn't drink coffee. that I think is somebody pointed this out and I was already well aware of it, but for some reason that I can't actually remember at the moment, he just needed to be drinking coffee at that time. And so I thought to myself, I'm just going to allow that on that one day he had a coffee at an unusual time. Big deal. I'm just going to give myself permission to do it. But that's the only time where I've allowed myself to kind of deviate from Poirot norms.
Okay.
Yeah, well, when have we, of us all, how have we not seen somebody and be like, why'd they do that? So in real life, that happens.
Well, exactly. People in real life do all kinds of crazy things.
Do we have, go ahead.
Oh, I like this question from Maureen Roberts. She asks, you write fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. How does your writing process differ between them, and how do you manage to switch gears so easily? I don't know if it's easily, but how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I also have another gear, which is I also write self-help books. I've written a self-help book called How to Hold a Grudge, which I will not talk about at great length, but I will just tell you the one-line pitch. How to Hold a Grudge is basically a book that argues that if you allow yourself to hold grudges in the right way, and the book explains what the right way is, then you actually become more forgiving and more well-balanced, and holding grudges in the right way is really good for you, not something to be avoided, as we are all taught. So I wrote that self-help book, and then I created a podcast of the same name, How to Hold a Grudge. So that was because my grudge research was continuing. I was still collecting and cataloguing new grudges and using them to make myself more forgiving and more enlightened, not less so. So that's another gear that I have. I actually find it comes quite naturally to switch between different kinds of writing. I find it much harder to understand when I hear about writers who for 30 years have been writing the same kind of book and nothing else. I would find that really restrictive. And after finishing one kind of book, I am then usually in the mood to do something different next. What makes it possible and even easy for me to change gears in that way is I have a gap in between. I never finish a book and then start the next one the next day. I think if I tried to write a new self-help book the day after finishing a Poirot, I would, have Catchpool popping up and I'd have to go, oh no, wrong book. But, I generally have at least a month. No, who am I trying to kid? I generally have at least 6 months between finishing one and starting another. And so for the whole of that time, I'm kind of gradually disengaging from the brain that needed to create the last book and going into the mode that's needed to create the new one.
Interesting. I have a question here from Barbara Jenko. She has a lot of questions, so I'll try and pick one that I'm not sure that we've discussed yet. Here's an interesting thing. How do you confront the impulse to reimagine Christy? She's thinking of the book Rodham. So she says, how do you confront the impulse to reimagine Christy with our 21st century attitudes on racism, sexism, sexuality, class, social justice, politics? Are you looking forwards? Are you looking backwards in these books?
Okay, so my books, my Poirot novels are all set between 1928 and 1932.
Right.
And however many I end up writing, they will all take place in those 4 years, because when we were in the early days, HarperCollins and the Christie family and I were discussing where to set the first book, we just discovered this convenient window of opportunity. Those 4 years between 1928 and 1932, Agatha didn't write any Poirot novels. So we were like, right, that's where they're going. So because of that, I obviously can't write anything that wouldn't be realistic at that time. But what I can do, for example, in the Monogram Murders, there's a character who is a vicar's wife. She's called Margaret Ernst, and she is talking at one point to Poirot and Catchpool about a married man who had some kind of liaison. I don't know whether it was a full-on affair. I think it was a full-on affair. So he had this affair with a woman who was not his wife. And Catchpool, who she's telling this story to, is kind of, disapproving of that kind of thing as a proper 1929 well-behaved gent would. And Margaret Ernst, the vicar's wife, who also exists in 1929, says something like, look, when two people love each other, that's the most important thing, even if some breaking of marriage vows has to happen. That's not an exact quote. It's years ago since I wrote it, but she basically sticks up for following your heart and committing adultery, and she's a vicar's wife. And the way I thought of that was, you know, I wanted that view represented in the book, and I thought, well, is it possible that a vicar's wife might think that? You know, she's a very good and dutiful vicar's wife, and she's never put a foot wrong herself, but might she believe that following your one true love, wherever that leads, is something we should all do? And I thought, yeah, you might have someone who believed that and who led a very blameless life, but almost because of her own virtue and rule following, she's kind of able to cheer on somebody who's braver and defies convention in that way. I think she even says something like, God would want us to go off with the person we most want to snog, or whatever. She didn't put it like that. But so like, if someone could think it in 1929, then I feel happy including it in the book. I don't try to bring 21st century attitudes into my Poirot novels because they would be glaringly unrealistic. So there are some views and beliefs that are commonly held now that nobody would have thought about. And the one I just described about the affair, that's not in that category. There would have been some people in the 20s and 30s who thought having affairs was kind of, I mean, all the people who had affairs, in fact, must have thought that it was, you know, if not ideal, then, you know, at least maybe understandable. So my rule of thumb is, I mean, what I don't do ever is put in something offensive that wouldn't have been offensive then. So there are words and phrases that people would have used in 1930s unthinkingly that we would not use now because they're regarded as offensive now. I wouldn't include any of those. And it's easy not to. You can just not use those words and those phrases. But what I wouldn't do, like I wouldn't have somebody being super woke in the middle of a Poirot novel denouement set in 1930. You know, because it just wouldn't be realistic. So right. I have to just go by what's realistic for the time.
Right. We have a little bit of time, but I wanted to get, Chris and Lainey, is there anything burning on your campfire? I don't even know what that means. No, we're good. Okay. So Sophie, we have a little bit of time. So we have Janet Lockhart, who says, I would love to hear details about the master's degree in crime and the thriller writing program that Sophie Hannah helped create at Cambridge University. And from there, I'd like to talk about Dream Author.
Okay, so those are two completely different things. The master's degree at Cambridge University is something that was created 2 years ago, but the first cohort of students started, let me get the years right. No, sorry, we created it last year. We did all the sort of groundwork. Then it started in January this year with the first cohort of students. And unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to kind of suspend it, and we're restarting again next year. So that was a bit inconvenient, but basically it is a master's degree in crime and thriller writing. I am the course director and the main teacher on the course, and I have a brilliant team of other teachers who also teach and who help me. One of whom is Ellie Griffiths. Some of your librarians might have heard of Ellie Griffiths, and various other brilliant staff members. And we teach you everything you need to know in order to write a brilliant crime novel, suspense novel, thriller. It's anything in the crime, thriller or suspense genre. So it's essentially a creative writing master's degree, but with a specific reference, a specific focus on crime and thrillers. And we are going to be opening our application process again for the next cohort. So the next cohort will start in September 2021. Applications will open round about October this year, I think, and we'll be interviewing people early next year. And then the people who are successful at interview will then go on to start in September. And it's brilliant. And I should also say, although this is slightly frivolous, but all the teaching takes place in this beautiful hall in Cambridge called Madingley Hall. It's actually in a little village outside Cambridge. The course is low residency, so people come from all over the world to do it. There are 4 in-person residentials where you come to Cambridge and you stay at Madingley Hall, which is like something out of an Agatha Christie novel. It's like this massive stately home kind of place with wood paneling and a dining hall, and you get fed the most amazing meals, and it's amazing. It's a really beautiful environment to learn crime and thriller writing in. And so there are 4 residentials where you stay for 3 nights and have 4 days teaching. And then other than that, it's supervisions and everything's done, online in between those 4 residentials. And it's amazing. I'm really, really loving it. So that's the Masters in Crime and Thriller Writing. And
I'll just interrupt for 1 second to tell you that we have so many librarians, of course, joining, and we love Ellie Griffiths, says Wendy Bartlett. Janet Lockhart, yes, I love Ellie Griffiths, particularly the Ruth Galloway series. So
yeah.
You're all in the same world here. And now you're going to segue over to Dream Author?
Yeah, so Dream Author is completely different, although I guess connected, because it's also for writers. Dream Author is a coaching program. So it's not a creative writing course. It is a coaching program for writers of any kind. So any genre, any level of experience. Dream Author has members who are very experienced best-selling writers who've been publishing books for decades. We also have members who are brand new writers and maybe have never completed a whole novel or a whole book yet. Lots of people join because they've always wanted to write, but they somehow have convinced themselves that they can't or shouldn't, or else they've started and then they've given up. A few of the members have started and given up multiple times, so they join. Everyone joins with a different challenge. Some people will say, I've started and abandoned 30 novels. If I do the Dream Author program, will I be able to complete a novel? And I say, yes, you will. So basically, I provide coaching. I do all the coaching myself, and it's a group coaching program where you also get individual coaching. I designed it really carefully in order to make it the resource that I would have loved to have when I started as a writer. And basically the sort of the pitch is, all writers or anyone who wants to write has kind of dreams, writing dreams or writing goals. But most writers, when they think about their dreams in connection with writing, like, I want to publish a book, I want to be a bestseller, I want to be able to live on the money that I earn from my writing and give up the day job, whatever your writing dream is, if when you think about it, it makes you feel happy and motivated and you think, yeah, I'm aiming for that, no problem, I'm going to achieve that, then there's no issue. But 95% of writers, that is not an exact statistic, I've just made it up, but a hell of a lot of writers, they have these dreams and goals and ambitions in relation to their writing. And when they think about them, it makes them feel miserable and stressed and ashamed and undeserving. And I have people coming to me saying, well, I want to be a writer, but I'm too old. There was one woman who was 74 and she had the most brilliant idea for a book, but she was convinced, absolutely convinced, that at 74, she was too old and no publisher would be interested and it wasn't worth it. And I coached her using all the Dream Author principles, and that resulted in her gradually moving from that mindset to a mindset where she thought, maybe it's possible. We did a whole sort of ladder of thoughts, because at first she couldn't believe that it was possible. And if someone doesn't believe something, you can't say to them, just believe it because it's true. There's no point saying that. So I said, okay, you can't believe it's possible. I want you to spend 2 weeks deliberately thinking every day, I don't think it's possible for me to be a successful writer at 74, but Sophie does think it's possible. Just practice thinking that for 2 weeks and then tell me how you feel about it at the end of the 2 weeks. So at the end of the 2 weeks, she said to me, it's the strangest thing. I still kind of am trying to not think it's possible, but because I keep repeating to myself that you think it's possible, and then I have to kind of admit that you know as much about these things as I do, I have started to think maybe it's possible. I was like, aha, this is it. And then you just sort of work on the belief system. And what Dream Author is all about is identifying all the areas where the obstacles that writers and aspiring writers think are very real, identifying where those obstacles are just thoughts in their brains. So many writers, if you said to them, well, what's stopping you from going after your writing goals and dreams? They would say, or they do say, like people say this to me every day. They'll say like, oh, I'm too old, or well, I've published 3 books in the past and they all didn't sell, so I'm just not successful. I'm just not someone who can be successful. And they really believe all these limiting thoughts. And Dream Author is all about showing people that actually they can create any result they want once they realize that it's their own thoughts and feelings that create their results, not any external circumstance. So I remember the first thing I ever published way back in the day. I was 20 or something, and I published a pamphlet of poetry, one like it didn't have a spine, like a limited edition pamphlet, 200 copies only. The minute I heard that my pamphlet was going to be published, I felt super successful. I was like, I'm a published writer. I'm a big deal. And then when I got my author copies, there was one night, they hadn't sold yet at all. And I was in the pub with my husband and some friends. And there was this chap called Dave, who I can still picture vividly, even though I've never seen him since. And we got chatting and he asked me what I did. And I said, well, I'm a poet. I've just published my first poetry pamphlet. And he was like, oh, I like poetry. Where can I see a copy? So I was like, well, I happen to have one in my handbag. Would you like to see it? So he said, yes. So I showed it to him and he said, he looked on the back and it said £2.95. He said, can I buy this copy? Will you sign it for me? I was like, what? You want to buy my book? Honestly, I just felt like I'd been made queen of the world. He was like, yeah. I was like, you honestly want to give me £3 for my poems? He was like, yes, I do. So he gave me the £3. I signed the book. 1 copy I had sold, 1 copy. I decided at that moment that I was a successful writer. Now, I may have been completely delusional, but it was a delusion that served me really well. Because as I then tried to publish novels and then crime novels, every time I got a disappointing result, like an agent saying, no, thanks, we don't like your novel, I would have cognitive dissonance. I'd be like, hang on, something's gone wrong here. I'm a super successful writer. If I've got a bad result, something's gone wrong. I just carry on till I get the good result that I know is coming my way, because after all, I'm a super successful writer. And I was just lucky that I kind of stumbled across that way of thinking. And when I meet and talk to writers, I see that they don't naturally think like that. And I have so many people in Dream Author who, for example, had 1 book and it was a huge success and they felt great because they had success. But then the next book comes out, it still sells loads of copies by any normal standards, but they feel like a failure because it's not sold as many copies. And so I always say to dream authors, who I call them my dream authors, when they join and they say, I'm never going to be successful, I feel like a failure because my novel's been rejected 10 times. I say to them, do you imagine that when you finally get a novel published, you will just feel brilliant all the time? And they're like, yes, I will. I said, well, would it surprise you to learn that half of my dream author clients are people you would regard as mega successful and they feel dreadful. They wander around feeling like failures because they've just been offered a 50 grand advance rather than the 100 grand advance they got for their last book, which proves that it's not our circumstances or the externals that create our feelings. It's our thoughts and what we choose to believe that creates our feelings. So, I mean, that's just a little glimpse into the dream author approach. But the brilliant thing about the program, and I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because I created it and I deliver it and it's my thing, but it is genuinely brilliant. And what happens is people start thinking in a different way. And because they're thinking in that different way, they take actions that they would not have dreamed of taking before. And those actions are the ones that get them the success. So someone who would have given up at a certain point, and this was an actual example of a real member, he said, I just can't take any more rejection and disappointment. Please, will you let me give up? And I said, of course, it's not up to me what you do. You absolutely can give up whenever you want, but just out of interest, if you weren't to give up, obviously you're giving up. We know you're giving up, but if you weren't giving up, what might you do next? I said, I will stop nagging you about not giving up and I'll let you give up if you design a strategy for what you would have done next had you not been giving up. And he was like, all right then. So he went off and designed this plan, came back and he said, well, here's what I would do if I wasn't giving up. I was like, oh yeah, that's quite interesting, but okay, now you can give up. He was like, well, now that I've done this strategy, you know, I might as well just try it. He pursued the strategy and found a publisher who loved his book, and it's being published next year. And it's going to be a lead title. So it's things like that. And it's just like I've now got several hundred members, and the next phase, Dream Author Cohort 2, is just about to start. If anyone is interested, you can still join for the next wave of Dream Author. But of those many hundreds of people who were in the first cohort, I would say several dozen of them have landed major book deals. Another few dozen have achieved goals that they just couldn't achieve before. So like I see how it's working and just turning writers' lives around. So I'm really sort of excited and passionate about it.
That's so exciting, and it just you know, sometimes you just need somebody to remind you to get out of your own way. But
yeah.
You know, it's and I like that sort of almost like your catch and release approach with that gentleman. It was like, okay, you can go, but what are you going to do? And it's gentle guiding, and it's just really wonderful. So, what a great thing what a great service to have to do that. And we put the website up there, so it's very intriguing, and you know, people have stories to tell. And
yeah, and the other thing is that it's I deliberately created it so that any kind of writer at any level could join. So I've got Dream Author members who have never really given themselves permission to think of themselves as writers. I've got people who have full-time day jobs and an idea for a book, and they're almost embarrassed, you know, when they join, because when people join, I contact them and say, right, what are we helping you with? What do you want to achieve? And some people are embarrassed even to admit that they want to write a book. And I'll say, well, I know you want something in connection with writing because you've joined Dream Author. And then they'll have to have it coaxed out of them that they quite want to write a book, but their idea is probably rubbish and they'll probably never make it. And one woman who was really like that, like she wouldn't even admit that she was a writer. She was so kind of, I'm doomed to fail, there's no point. She's one of the biggest successes so far. She had multiple agents after her book, multiple publishers. She signed a massive deal with a big 5 publisher. And now she says, like, I cannot believe that before Dream Author, I wouldn't even call myself a writer. And now here I am with this amazing publishing deal. So yeah, it's really amazing.
Okay, I have to read a couple of, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to read a couple of comments to you before we sort of have to wrap up. But Janet Lockhart says, oh my gosh, I've never really considered writing a book, but Sophie's enthusiasm is making me want to try.
Excellent.
Douglas Beatty says, cognitive behavior therapy. Yeah, no kidding. You'd be a good therapist, Sophie Hannah, says Wendy Wilson. Bartlett from Cuyahoga. She also says, hang on one second, scrolling. We get asked about writing a lot in the library. This is a great resource to recommend to our customers. I'm so glad you're talking about this. It's wonderful.
Well, and also something else that I've just remembered, in the last 2 days, the Dream Author team, because I now have a team, because it sort of exploded and became so big that I had to then hire people to help me. We've just launched a Dream Author newsletter. And if you go to the Dream Author website, on the home page, you can sign up to receive the newsletter. So if you think it's something you might be interested in doing the full program at some point, if you sign up for the completely free newsletter, then every fortnight you will get a little Dream Author tidbit in your inbox. And obviously that's not the full program, it's just little bits, but it's still a good thing to sign up for, because at various points there are special offers, and there are some one-off events. For example, soon as I can fly to America again, my US Dream Author members have been really keen for me to organize a Dream Author one-day event in America. So that's the kind of thing that the newsletter will tell you about. So anyone who's interested, do sign up for the Dream Author newsletter.
I just signed up right now.
Excellent. That was efficient.
Oh my God, that's so cool. Chris, you put the link on the site, right? So
I did. I'll post it again.
Okay. And anybody,
And while I'm talking about newsletters, I should also say that you can also, if you want another newsletter, you can sign up for my author newsletter, where I talk about Poirot and my thrillers, and I give away free books, and I let you choose characters' names sometimes. If you go to sophiehannah.com, on the homepage there, you can sign up for my author newsletter as well. And you can always unsubscribe. If you get sick of me landing in your inbox on a too regular basis, you can unsubscribe quite easily.
I can't imagine anybody. I can't imagine anybody getting sick of you. You are.
No, neither can I. Some people do.
No. Well, they're wrong.
They're wrong. They are wrong. Yes.
They're wrong. Sophie, what can we say? This has been so fantastic. Just having this this engagement and the Q&A, and just being so lovely and answering all of the questions that people have, because they just want to know everything about what goes into your writings and how you do it. And it's absolutely wonderful. We thank you so much for
You're very welcome. Well, thank you all for asking such amazing questions, and it's been really great fun to be here. And I hope everyone enjoys the Killings at Kingfisher Hill.
The Killing at Kingfisher Hill goes on sale September 15th. Not one librarian came up with these. I think, well, it's Agatha Christie. I'm just going to say it. Agatha Christie, she would have been 130. So I'm very surprised one librarian did not say, no, 129. Anyway, The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. It's glamour, romance, jealousy, revenge, meticulously plotted mystery. It'll keep you up and wondering what is happening here in this book. And you'll just keep turning the pages, as I did, to find out how it all ends. And what a wonderful journey. And we're just thrilled to have this book under our roof. And we thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us today.
You're very welcome. It's been really lovely to chat to you all.
And as we bid adieu, and we wish you well and good health, you dive back into the river there, Sophie. We didn't get to show any of the pictures, but Sophie's an avid swimmer. And we were looking at some pictures before, and it just looked absolutely delicious. So thank you for inviting us to your house. We're all coming. There you are.
There's me. Oh, there's me in the river with my friend Jane. There we are. In fact, I was in that very river earlier today.
Good for you. Good for you. Okay, Chris, Lainey, anything before we say goodbye?
Just want to remind people, tomorrow, Instagram, Meg Cabot is all over it. I'm going to have really great posts. So go check that out. Harper Library, follow along all day.
And next Tuesday, Chris?
Yeah, next Tuesday, August 4th, 3 p.m. Eastern time, we have Diane Cook, author of The New Wilderness, and Jonathan Lethem, author of The Arrest. So join us for that. Some really cool speculative fiction, sci-fi, literary fiction. If you're a fan of any of those, this is for you. Definitely join us. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. So, and we'll post a link in the comments so you can sign up for the official event. And that's it for me.
Okay, and a link to Sophie's book is here in the comments, along with everything else we talked about. Sophie, we wish you well. Take good care, and we hope to see you face to face one day soon.
Yeah, let's hope so. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Sophie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.